I'm going to talk about some advanced Qualtrics things, specifically analytic strategies, how to tag data, and use the built-in reporting functionality. This was something, so I've used Qualtrics pretty much my whole time I've been at Harvard for different parts of my UX work. And I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself. I'm Amy Deshane. I'm the head of UX and digital accessibility for Harvard Library. But I started using Qualtrics a lot more in the last year and a half to do all of the reporting work. So rather than what I had been doing was like downloading the data to Excel or a Google Sheet and like manipulating it there, really took the time to dig into the tools that are built into Qualtrics, and they're super useful. Definitely a little bit of a learning curve, but hopefully today's presentation will help with that. The other thing is, if you have any questions as I go along, please put them in the chat. I will check that every so often as I'm going through. And also, if you can please put in the chat if you notice any audio or video issues on my part. We've had high winds here today, and I've had a couple of times I've gotten the dreaded, like, your connection is unstable message. So please let me know. And then there'll be time to chat at the end if there's any specific projects that you're working on that you want to get some thoughts on in Qualtrics. All right, so this is, again, really, you've collected the data, you are ready to start doing the analysis. But I will say that there are a lot of things you can do before you even run the survey to make analysis easier. I think it's really important to take steps at the beginning to set yourself up for analysis success with survey design. So if you are looking for a great overview of the basics of Qualtrics, how to get started, how to build surveys in Qualtrics, I definitely recommend checking out the last URC Brown Bag we had about Qualtrics that Danielle Lavoie did. The recording is on the UX Wiki, so if you're looking for something like that, that's also available. But like I said, today we're going to really be focused on analysis and design. So I'm just going to share a little bit about these 10 tips for survey success. And again, this is really, it feels like designing the survey and creating the survey, it's just like, oh, we'll just ask people questions. Like, it can feel very easy, but I think it is deceptively easy. And a lot of times, if you don't craft your survey questions in a thoughtful way, it can really, really come through when it comes time to do the analysis. Like, if you send out a survey and it's like 6 open-ended questions and you don't get a lot of people responding, and then you realize you have to, it takes a lot more time to do analysis on open-ended questions, right? So thinking about using open-ended questions judiciously in your surveys is definitely something to consider. So these 10 tips, the first thing is to start with a goal and a plan. Don't start with the questions, right? And also make sure that a survey is the right method for whatever project you're working on. Sometimes a usability test is a better option. Sometimes an interview is better. So definitely consider, is a survey the right method to be using? Surveys can feel, like I said before, really easy because they're familiar, right? Like, everyone has at least taken a survey. So they just feel like super easy to create. But again, make sure that you are using the right method for the questions. So the example I'm going to use throughout this presentation is a survey we ran last spring about library events. So this was the research plan for that survey. As you can see, we have stated goals and we have research questions. These research questions are not the same as survey questions. The purpose of the research questions is to define what you want to learn in a study, and also to prevent scope creep from happening. Because especially with surveys, people may want to start asking for like demographic data or certain pieces of personal information that aren't actually furthering the goals of your survey. So just make sure that all of the questions in your survey really support what you want to learn. So for this particular project, we were looking, I'm going to just go through these research questions. What types of library events are students most interested in? Where do they find out about Harvard events? And that's non-library, just like Harvard events in general. What types of events do they like to attend? And then what is their awareness level related to library events? So every question in our survey maps to one of these research questions. And if we had an idea for a survey question that maybe seemed like additional or like didn't map to one of these, we either said, nope, we're cutting it, or okay, we need to revisit the research questions and either broaden or add a specific question here. So again, it's important to make these specific and important to articulate these before you start developing the survey itself. So the second thing here, sort of going along with writing for the web and all those good things, is just using plain language. Use tools like the Hemingway editor, which is an app for reviewing your own writing for plain language. Just like put your questions in there, reduce the number of adverbs you're using, things like that. All of those plain language tips, make sure you carry them over when you're asking your survey questions. And then also a couple of other things with the questions themselves, making sure you're only asking about one concept per question. It should be very simple to answer a question. It should not take a lot of time, and you don't want to make sure there's too many things, you're stuffing too many things into one single question. That can sometimes happen if people are trying to keep surveys short. They're like, oh, we only have 5 questions. Then you try to like cram too many things into one question. I think it's better to have more questions that are like stricter, more to the point, and more succinct. So the other thing is to avoid double barrel questions. So things that ask, like if you find that you're using the word and in your questions, or you're actually asking about 2 things in the same question. So for instance, like, how do you feel about Hollis and the library website? Well, I could feel very differently about library.harvard.edu than I do about Hollis, the library catalog, right? So, but you're lumping those 2 things together. So you want to avoid that. And also avoiding answers that overlap as well. So I'm just gonna look in the chat. So Valerie asked, what was the resource again for plain language? Sure, it's the Hemingway editor. So it's just hemingwayapp.com. You can paste in whatever kind of text you want in here, and it pulls out, gives you a readability grade, and it pulls out some issues for you. It's super useful, especially like even if you're writing like emails or reports or something, it's just really useful to check your text in there. Okay, so for 6 through 10, I already mentioned avoiding too many open-ended questions, right? Like, I also think another thing, not only will it make your analysis more difficult, but if you're finding that you have a lot of open-ended questions, there might be a better method than a survey. I think that's another indicator, either doing interviews or a focus group or some kind of design thinking activity. That might be a better match if you are looking for more qualitative data, right? Because surveys are primarily about collecting quantitative data. Number 7, using ratings that are easy to understand. So this PDF is probably like my most used PDF in the world. I don't know what that says about me, that I have like a most used PDF, but all it is examples for Likert questions. So if you're doing things like, do you agree or disagree with this? Or like, how important is this to you? One, you should be consistent with the language you use for those Likerts. So a Likert question has like these ratings. You're probably familiar, have experienced them if you've taken a survey. But use this PDF or like some other example of Likerts. This was developed for social science researchers, and it's just kind of become a go-to for me. So like, I'm not coming up with them. Qualtrics does generate them automatically sometimes, but sometimes I don't want as many options as they're giving you. You always have to make a choice if you want to have a middle option for people, or you want to force people to move. If you had 4 options, there's no real middle. You sort of have to be more agree or be more disagree. I generally go with 5 options rather than 7, rather than 3. I like to keep the survey as simple as possible. And I have tried 7 and I've gotten the feedback that it's too overwhelming, and I've gotten 3 and I've gotten the feedback that that's not enough like options for people. So I do generally go with 5. The other thing is your mileage may vary, but for the surveys I'm doing, they are usually about service design or interface design. They're not strict social science research to like publish, knowledge about a certain way people behave or something. So there are different rules if you're looking to do statistically significant research. But anyway, this sort of Likert example page set is really helpful. Number 8 is to have a logical flow of questions. And what I mean by this is a couple of things. So first off, definitely ask whatever you think is like the easiest questions, or like the short, like easiest questions to answer. Ask those at the beginning, because then it makes the person feel comfortable and like, oh, this won't take too much time, and ask the harder questions toward the end. And the other thing is, if you have different sections in your survey, organize them like as if you were organizing or outline a report or a document or something. Don't just, especially if you have that research plan. If I go back here, right? So like we had questions in our survey that mapped to each of these research questions. They did not necessarily follow this order, right? So like we created the questions and then we said like, okay, what order of operations makes sense? So like we asked about, I think, Harvard events writ large first, because we assumed that most people know that Harvard offers events for students, but maybe fewer people know that the library offers events for students. So that required a little bit of context setting on our part. So like the first thing was something that was familiar, probably something they'd experienced in the past, asking about those Harvard-wide events. And then we got a little bit more narrow, asking about library events. Ask for big ideas at the end of the survey. I sort of stressed the point before, you don't want to have a survey that is just open-ended questions. One, because it's harder to complete. Two, because analysis. Three, because it probably indicates you should be using another method. But if you do want to have, like, for instance, we're running a survey right now about getting feedback on Hollis, our library catalog. So if you want to ask like a big picture question, we do have one at the end that's like, what's one thing that you would suggest we change about Hollis, right? So there's a couple of points in that question. One, we just said, what's one thing? That has been shown, like using that wording is easier for people to answer, because it rather than saying like, is there anything else you want to tell us? Like that feels very open and it's a little bit more work for the person. But if you're setting that context of like, just tell us one thing, that's it, one thing you would change. And often they tell you more than one thing, which is fine too. But I think that it's more likely that people will answer open-ended questions if you're giving them specific parameters around that. And I think my other last tip here for survey success is, if you can, do your analysis with a partner or a team to mitigate any, unrealized biases that we all have, right? Especially like if you've been the one designing the survey, bring, a colleague or two in to help you do analysis, to read through the data, because you're bringing the bias of like, you have this background in designing the survey, and you might sort of take things out of context or want the data to go a certain way or amplify things that really don't need to be amplified. So I definitely think bringing in multiple people to help with the analysis can make it a lot easier. I'm going to pause there. If anyone has a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. Okay, so now we're going to get into Qualtrics itself. So these are sort of how I think of the building blocks of survey reports. So you have charts, data tables, and then pulling out quotes and themes from the survey. That's the part that takes the most work, is pulling out the themes and the quotes. And that's where really you should be spending your energy and time when it comes to survey analysis. So I'm going to show Qualtrics now. And like I said, this library events student survey is the one I will be talking about throughout this presentation. So the survey was completed by over 80 Harvard College and FAS students, was sent to HC and GSAS students, and informed sort of the design of how events are presented on the website and also future event content. It was originally pitched by research, teaching, and learning staff at the URC's pitch sessions. We have those a couple of times a year to solicit ideas for UX research from the library staff. And then I mentioned that research plan and Qualtrics. That was our tools for this project. All right, so once sort of we've collected the data and it's in Qualtrics, these are sort of the steps that I take to go through Qualtrics data. So I'm going to go through those now. All right, so we're in Qualtrics. The first thing I usually do is look at this reports tab, right? So the data and analysis tab is going to have all your data sort of in a spreadsheet kind of view. But I think the first thing I like to look at is the reports, because it just gives you this canned view of things, of the results. And it's a little bit easier sort of to start digesting people's responses. And yes, Valerie asked if the presentation and the recording will be shared. Yes. All right, so this was, first time going in. This is what's auto-generated for you by Qualtrics, question by question. So there's this results tab here. And then if you have needs that this results tab doesn't give you, like if you want to do different things with layout, there is a reports option that gives you even more freedom in how you design things. I generally stick to the results tab because I just think it's easier, and I'm not looking to do anything too fancy with the data usually. So you see that up at the top here, it says report. I created this demo report for this session, but you can create new reports, you can copy reports. What I like to do is to set up the report exactly how I want it. And then if I want to do things like create a new report that say has a filter, or create a new report that's just like features 2 questions or something, I'll spend a lot of time sort of tweaking the look of this first and then create copies that I add a filter to. So add a filter here. So this is great because you can filter out some of the data in the report, or just like filter down based on any of the questions. So like if we only wanted to see this data by people who said yes, they have attended a library event in the past, it auto generates this filter for you. You can say is yes, I've attended 1 library event. Yes, I've attended more than 1. And then you can have different parameters too if you wanted to do both of the yeses. This allows you to add multiple filters. So you could add another filter here. How did you, have you attended a library event? Yes. Is yes, I've attended more than 1. And then I will click save and apply. So then it changes over to like this manage filters. And you can go in and adjust your filters as you need to. So I'm going to take those away. You can also have multiple filters. I believe once you add filters here, these will be available in all of the reports, and you can name them whatever you want to do. All of the reports in this particular Qualtrics project. Okay. So that's the results wide filters. Over here, you've got some other options. You can edit the report. So this is what allows you to choose the questions. If you only wanted to show certain questions in this report, you could turn them off here. You can also turn them off over here. This also easily allows you to reorder things. So you can drag and drop questions. So, I think it's important when you're making these reports to consider your audience. You also might want to make, one report that's, for the committee you're working with, and then one report that's for your manager or something. So like if you're doing something like that, you might consider what's the order of the questions, what's the most important thing to talk about first, what is this particular audience for the data care most about? So just something to keep in mind, that you can sort of, depending on who you're speaking with, what you want to highlight from the data, or like how deeply you want to delve into the findings, definitely keep that in mind as well. So that was a report. Sorry, that was edit report. So that's that part. This is also where you can change the name of the report. And then there's report settings. So this is this is what causes all these default reports to be created. So like if you don't want to use decimals in your report, you can set that here and do save, and it's going to like update that for all of the questions in this report, rather than having to go through each individual question. And then, or like other things too, if you want to change your color palette, if there's other options you wanted for these things, like you can just turn, like if you just want charts, you could turn these off. So right now, for every question, this report will generate a chart, a simple table, and a statistics table. So you can see that here. So for that first question, the chart right here, and then the table, and the text answers. So that's there. So if you only wanted the chart, you can change that here to just be like, I just want the charts. All right, so done that. So now each question is only going to have a chart, right? I mean, there's some open-ended text that is included, but it doesn't have that data table that we were seeing before under every chart. So anyway, report settings, super helpful. So you don't have to do the same thing over and over again. All right, so now getting into here, there is an option to break out the data for every question. That's the report breakout. So what a breakout does is, like, if you wanted to see this data, but you wanted to sort of, it's similar to like a pivot table, or if you've used like the tab data options in here before, it's similar to that. So if you wanted to break out the data by this, before this survey, were you aware that like the library has offered events? So this is showing you by that answer. So this is like, yes, I was aware. No, I wasn't aware. Right. So you can do that with any question. It's sometimes really helpful to do it like by demographic questions, right? So like, let me unclick this. I'm going to choose, what type of student are you? Right. So this is showing the answers by what type of student they are. So I'm going to keep that there because I think that's interesting. You can also apply a breakout at a question level. So if you only wanted a breakout for like this question, you can click on that, and over here, the data source like sidebar comes up and gives you a lot of options about how you can customize just this presentation. Like, so just for this first question here, there is a breakout option right here, breakout by, and the default Q13, that's the one that's been selected for the whole report, or you can change it to show, say like, oh, I want to see this by a different thing. You can also always like duplicate this question and add a breakout. So like have the question presented like by type of student, and then have the question presented, say, by age or something, if you wanted to do that. So that's the breakout. This is the way to search questions. There's also a way to create a custom page. So for that, if you wanted to create a new page and that, you could give it a different title, or like have an additional page with the same report broken out in a different way, or like filtered in a certain way, that's how you can do that. All right, so over here is going to be the main part of the report. So this is what will get printed or shared via a web page if you choose to do that. And you can make all kinds of edits and changes here. So like if you wanted to say, get rid of the question numbers for each of those, right? Because it doesn't, like, if somebody is viewing this report and they see Q16, that's confusing. So like you can change those to like, you can either leave them blank or like could write in your own numbers if you wanted to. And I would also say when you're making these kind of adjustments, I like to remove any wording that was like specific to a person who was filling out the survey. So like select all that apply. How did you learn about library events? Like probably doesn't need that in the report. All right, and as I mentioned before, there's lots of options over here to change things. This data source is just telling you that the data from this question is coming from, the data from this chart is coming from Q16. The metric, it defaults to choice count, but you can also do like percentages and things like that. And then decimal places, you remember in our report settings, we picked 0. So that has changed it, every graph to 0. You can add a title to the graph itself. So that's going to like put that here. So in case you had a page with like multiple reports, you could make this maybe like give a little more context for if you had multiple questions, and then use that chart title to do the title for the charts. This is where you can change the visualization. You can change it to a table view, which is just gonna look like an Excel spreadsheet. You can do a line chart, you can do a pie chart or a breakdown bar. I like the breakdown bar, but for ones that are like broken out, you might want to simplify the data, right? So this is like too much to see in the breakdown bar, but you could filter this in another way. So like if you said, I just want to know like the people who said from social media, right? Oh, I'm not sure what happened there. That's weird. But anyway, just I would say to explore this visualization and figure out like what works best for you. One other thing that I think is important to decide if you are using a bar graph. I like to show the bar labels. I think it's easier to read. There is also an option to have like a legend or like an X or Y axis. And the other thing I always think about is if I want to do this transpose option. So what transpose is going to do is going to like flip the way the data is presented. So right now it's presented by the type of student. If I choose transpose, it's going to be presented by the option that they chose in the question. And then the bars are the types of students. So again, just like think about your data, what's going to make the most sense for your audience, and if you want to use that transpose option or not. I find it really helpful sometimes. All right, I'm just going to look out on the chat. So Odile wrote, regarding breakouts, I sometimes run into an issue where the question I want to break out by isn't available from the dropdown or somehow not configured for breaking out. If you've encountered this, do you have advice for addressing it? I have only encountered it if it is a field I have created myself. So like after the survey is done, you can add additional fields like for tags. I have had cases where like those don't show up or I have to hunt for them. And I think it's like, it takes a little while. What I mean by that is like, if you log into Qualtrics and like go have a cup of tea and come back, like then your tag field usually shows up. But I haven't had that experience where I don't see my question here. Danielle, if you have had this happen or have any thoughts on this, if you want to throw them in the chat, that'd be great. But yeah, it's just, if that happens, definitely, I mean, feel free to email me or, you know, ask Hewitt about that, because that seems weird. Everything should show up here, for which I don't know if it allows it for certain kind of question types. Maybe that's what it is. So like, I don't know if you get the option for like open-ended questions here. It might only be the ones that are the quantitative questions that you can pick. So that's my other guess. Yeah. All right. So again, so just one more time, if you click on the chart, then you get this data source. This is where you can kind of play around with everything. Let me just show you what an open-ended question looks like, because I feel like sometimes the options that I choose are different here. So this is, again, it's still breaking it down. These are the open-ended responses. It's still breaking it down by what type of student they are. So when you are here, one thing that is helpful, I think, is if you are interested in reading a certain person's entire answer based on something they wrote here, you can click on the clipboard and it brings up the record for the entire response. So a lot of times, like if we're hearing really critical feedback or something, sometimes it's really helpful to put it in context of like the entire answer. So I find that little option really helpful. So in terms of presenting this data, you have the option to change the number of results per page. And what that means is just like, it's going to paginate at a certain point. So if you wanted to show more, you can show up to 100. Of course, that's going to give you like a big long table. But if you think that's preferable, I mean, that's totally fine. So that's one of the options for that. Same kind of thing with adding a title and what you can do there. All right, so I think that I've covered everything in terms of presentation and options here. If you want to share the report, you can certainly download it as a PDF, PowerPoint, Word, all those good things. I actually really like using the public report option, because especially for reports where we have like a rolling data collection, I can just give people, like the stakeholders for the project, this link and they can go and see it like in real time as the data is coming in. So one other thought with reports, you don't need to wait for the survey to be done before you start making your report, right? You probably do need to like wait until your survey is complete before you start tagging or doing any like qualitative analysis. But in terms of designing this report, you have like 5 answers, you can still start to think about designing the report. So that might be helpful. All right, so this is a public report. You can add an access code if you want to. So this is basically just like a password. I don't know why they just don't call it password, but that is for another day. So if I go here, right, so this is the report that we were just working on. There we go. So you get that hover action that shows you a little bit more about the counts. And then I wanted to see, right, so the one thing that is different is that you don't get that little clipboard option here, that button that I showed before. That's not an option over here. And I think it's just, you know, for privacy's sake. So if this is going out publicly, you don't have to worry about like you can't see the entire response in that way that you can in the Qualtrics report area. And then people have the option to download this as a PDF if they prefer to see it this way. All right, so I'm going to move on to talk about tagging. But again, feel free to put questions in the chat and I will get to them. All right, so I'm going to go over to data and analysis. So this is like, say you had some open-ended questions in your survey and you want to, the way I think of tagging sometimes is like you want to be able to pull out themes, maybe look for quotes, and then also give more structure to that qualitative data that you collected here, right? So I think there's two parts. There is reading of the data and like pulling out the themes and saying like, here's an insight based on some of the stuff people wrote in. But then there's also, here is an effective way to present this data, the qualitative open-ended stuff, through a Qualtrics report. So like people can see like, oh, okay, here were some of the main takeaways. So like, you know, if I'm Suzanne Wands, I don't have to read through all of the comments that came in. I can see like, okay, the main themes of this were X, Y, Z. So that is sort of the work of tagging. So to do that, this data and analysis page, the first thing you want to do is set it up so you are looking at the data that you are working with. It just seems kind of random sometimes when you go into here what questions you see by default, but you can change this. So over here under tools, you want to go to choose columns. So this is where you can pick what you're going to see in this section. So right now it's showing me Q15. I don't want to see that. And it's showing me this event type and student type. So these are tags we had created. Okay, so this was Q13. All right. Okay. So basically I just took away all the data, right? So now I'm just gonna pick what I want to look at. So I'm gonna pick something that's like an open-ended question that I want to tag. So let's do, what did you think of the event? So this was like, if they'd attended a library event, what did they think about it? All right, and this is not going to be everybody answered this. So one thing I'm going to do now is add a filter and say for Q14, what did I think of the event? Don't show me things that are empty. So I'm going to go is not empty. And now I'm just seeing when people attended a library event and they put comments in about it. Those are the ones I'm seeing now. So now I'm going to have like a quick read through of this set of data. And usually this is my first step. I don't do anything in Qualtrics at this point other than read the data and just write down some like first thoughts. Another couple of things with tagging, you don't need to tag every question. Some like they're generally great. Yay, I'm glad that person feels like that. Like maybe in the future, I'll think about how to write a more specific question so people don't give that kind of response. But that's something that happens with surveys all the time. But like that doesn't need a tag. Like you might, if you're interested in just like measuring like positive and negative feelings, like you could do something like that. But don't feel like you absolutely need a tag. And this is also when you're thinking about what tags are going to be most useful, going back to that research plan and being like, oh, okay, what types of events do they like to attend? And like this question might contribute to that, but how am I going to make the tags to make sure it contributes to those research goals and it's not just like superfluous information? All right, so a couple of things I am seeing. well-organized facilitation, wish more people knew about it. So maybe like, how am I going to translate these things into tags? So like for wish more people knew about it, I would say like the tag would be awareness, right? So I'd write down the word awareness. And then once I'm ready to add the tags, over here, you go to tools and create new fields, and it automatically is going to create a tag field. There are different options here. So let's call this library event feedback. And then I would do create variable. So that's going to automatically add it to this view. This reindexing thing sometimes takes a couple minutes. While it's doing that, oh no, it's not. Oh, there we go. This is usually what I do. I just usually reload it. I'm impatient. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. All right, so I'm going to pause that. I will show you how to add the tags in a moment. But while this is working, I'm going to go back to reports. So in Qualtrics, when you migrate away from something like that, it's still working in the background. So you don't have to worry about like you have to stay on the page. But I just wanted to show you, once you have added a tag field, it's automatically going to add that tag field as a new question in your report. So like library event feedback, that was the tag I just created. So it has added it here. Obviously there's nothing in it because the data wasn't loading. But then you're able to, so this is another one we had added in the past where we were asking for like the type of event. Oh, this was a tag, excellent event themes. This is like we went through. And okay, so now just as a reminder, before we set the entire report to like default to showing that chart visualization. For this, since it was an open-ended question, I'm probably going to choose simple table because that wasn't really helpful to see like how many people put these tags in, right? So another thing you can do is break out answers by tags. So like if I go back to like, what did you think of the event? You could add the tag in here as like another breakout level. So right now we have this undergraduate one, but you could add tags in as a breakout level. So it would show you the tag and then it would show you the answers to the, like the open-ended question, the open-ended answers that like map to that tag. So I'm gonna go back to data and analysis. Okay, so now it's here. Unfortunately, I have lost my filters. So that's why I'm seeing the open ones. I mean, the empty ones. Empty. All right. So here is where you would just click on edit here. And you can choose to add a tag. So once you do that, you can click here. I'm going to add awareness as a tag. You know, that I've looked through and see if there's any other ones that would warrant the term awareness. So now if I go back, turn off editing, go back to reports, go to this library event feedback. It's taken a minute. I feel like my computer fan has turned on. But anyway, this is where you would see, you'd see that awareness tag, and then you would see the answers that got that awareness tag underneath. All right, so that's everything that I have prepared around reports and tags. One last thing I just want to share with the different types of fields you can create in here. You create new fields. Some of the other options that are a little more advanced can be really useful. So like this bucketing one, say you had a liker where like you had strongly agree and agree as options and you just wanted to like bucket those together. for your report, here's where you could do that. So you could say like, take these fields and put them in a group together, and then that will add it as a variable or like a question within the report. So then there's some other ones. I have not used these, but these are other ways to sort of combine data that you have from a report. Last thing, if you do want to use like multiple surveys in one report, you can do that, but you have to use this reports option. You can't use the results option, but this is where you could add multiple Qualtrics surveys like to this one report. So that can be really helpful if you have multiple surveys over time or something like that.